This example allows us to take a look at concepts of trade, particularly production possibilities, frontiers, and comparative advantages. And for these two players, A and B, were given what they're able to produce in apples and cherries and what they are producing and consuming without trade. And as you can see in this table down here, I've filled in that first row for us for the amounts that they're producing and consuming prior to engaging in trade with each other. But let's assume that they are going to engage in trade with each other, and we want to know what they're going to be producing and consuming. And to do that, we know we need to determine what their comparative advantages are, so we know what each is producing and each is consuming. So we see for player A here is that they're able to produce a total of 20 apples at a cost of 20 cherries. You can see that based upon their maximums of each. And this allows us to calculate a comparative or an opportunity cost for producing one apple, which is the cost of one cherry, which means vice versa. They can produce one cherry at a cost of one apple. Now for player B here, we see that they can produce 30 apples at a cost of 60 cherries, which means that they can produce one apple per 2 cherries. On the other hand, just taking the inverse of it, they could produce one cherry for half an apple. That would be their cost. So if we look at this, we can determine their comparing these opportunity costs allow us to determine what each player's comparative advantage is, which will tell us what each should be producing and thus trading with the other. So because player A has a lower opportunity cost of apples, you can see that it costs them only one cherry versus player B's 2 cherries. That means that player A should be producing apples, whereas player B has a lower opportunity cost of producing cherries, so they should produce cherries. So what we know here is that player A is going to only produce apples. So their production of apples with trade is going to be their maximum of 20 apples and 0 cherries. And on the other hand, player B is only going to produce cherries, so they're not going to produce any apples, and they're going to produce their maximum of 60 cherries. But now we want to know what each is going to consume, and we know that they should be better off with trade. We want them both to benefit. So they each need to be consuming more apples and more cherries than they currently are without trade. So let's assume that player A is now going to consume, let's say, 9 apples. They're going to produce these 20 apples. They're going to consume 9 on their own, which allows player B to now consume 11 apples, right? Because they're going to take the remaining apples. So that gives us our total of 20 apples produced. Player B, on the other hand, is going to produce 60 cherries. And let's suppose that they just need to consume more than their 42. So what amount of cherries can player B consume to leave enough left over so that player A is still left better off? Well, if we take 60 minus 12, right, because 60 is the maximum production of cherries, player A was first consuming 12 cherries, so that gives us 48. And what that tells us is that player A needs to be consumed, or player B can consume a maximum of 48 cherries while still allowing player A to be just as well off. But we want them to be better off. So let's suppose that we want player A to instead consume, say, 13 cherries. So that gives us a new equilibrium or trading rate that sits right in here, which means that 60 minus 13 leaves 47 cherries left over for player B. So 47 might sit down here. And what we can see from this is that both players are left better off with these productions. So let's fill in this table down here. Now we're seeing consumption with trade. Player A is now able to consume 9 apples and 13 cherries, whereas player B is now able to consume 11 apples and 47 cherries. And what we can see here is that their trade gains are going to be positive, and we do that by subtracting our consumption. So if we take player A's consumption of apples with trade minus their consumption prior to trade, we have 9 minus 8, which gives us a trade gain of 1 apple. Whereas for cherries, we have 13 minus 12. They again have a gain of 1 cherry. Player B, we've got 11 minus 9 for apples, giving them a gain of 2 apples, and 47 minus 42 cherries gives them a gain of 5 cherries. So what we can see here is that this rate of trading apples for cherries allows each player here to benefit because they're each gaining at least something from trade in both apples and cherries.